A young soldier disappears after a night out in North Carolina. Last seen leaving a bar with a man carrying a dark past. She never makes it home. For 2 years, her case haunted investigators and her family, until a shocking confession unraveled the mystery. What really happened to Private First Class Kelli Bordeaux, and why did it take so long to find the truth? She was only 23 years old, full of energy and hope for the future. Private First Class Kelli Bordeaux was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina, serving as a combat medic. On the night of April 14, 2012, she joined friends at a local bar called Froggy Bottoms. It was supposed to be a simple night out, just a chance to relax and enjoy herself. But it turned into the last night anyone would ever see her alive. Around 1:20 in the morning, witnesses saw Kelli leaving the bar with a man named Nicholas Holbert. He wasn't just another face in the crowd. He was a registered sex offender with a disturbing past. Holbert later told investigators that he gave Kelli a ride back to her apartment complex. According to him, she got out of the car and he drove away. But the detail that gnawed at investigators was simple. No one ever saw her walk inside. 2 days later, her husband, who was deployed overseas in Afghanistan, reported her missing. He had been unable to reach her by phone or email, and panic spread quickly. The Fayetteville Police and the Army's Criminal Investigation Division launched a massive search. They interviewed friends, combed through the bar, and focused on Holbert almost immediately. But without hard evidence, the case stalled. For over 2 years, Kelli's disappearance was a haunting mystery. Her family lived in limbo, never knowing if she was alive or dead. Rumors swirled, theories multiplied, and every new lead ended in frustration. The community waited for answers that never seemed to come. Then, in May 2014, everything changed. Holbert was arrested, and under pressure, he confessed. He admitted that he had killed Kelli that night and led authorities to her remains in a wooded area just 4 miles from the bar. After years of silence, the truth finally surfaced. Nicholas Holbert was sentenced to life in prison. Justice, at last, but at a devastating cost. Kelli's story is a reminder of how fragile life can be, and how one night, one decision, can change everything forever. The discovery of Kelli's body brought a wave of heartbreak, but also raised painful questions. How could it take more than 2 years for the truth to come out, when the suspect had been right there from the start? Investigators had looked at Holbert early on. They interviewed him. They even searched his trailer. But at the time, there wasn't enough physical evidence to make a case. Without a body, without witnesses, the story of what really happened stayed hidden in the dark. In those 2 years, Kelli's face appeared on missing person posters across Fayetteville. Volunteers searched fields and wooded trails. Her family pleaded for answers on television, their voices cracking with exhaustion and grief. Every phone call, every unknown number, brought a flash of hope that maybe, just maybe, she had been found alive. But the silence always returned, heavier each time. Behind the scenes, detectives never stopped watching Holbert. They knew his story didn't fit. They knew his background made him dangerous. But the justice system requires more than suspicion. It requires proof, and that's what they didn't have. So they waited, gathering fragments, hoping something would break. That break finally came when Holbert, under mounting pressure, confessed. He admitted he had taken Kelli into the woods after leaving the bar. There, in a moment of violence and cruelty, he ended her life. Then he buried her in a shallow grave, covering the site with brush and dirt, hoping no one would ever find her. For over 2 years, the forest kept its secret. When investigators finally uncovered the site, they recovered Kelli's remains and confirmed what her family had feared all along. The relief of finally knowing was tangled with the devastation of finality. There would be no joyful reunion, only the hard reality of loss. And yet, with the confession came a measure of justice. Holbert was sentenced to life in prison, never to harm anyone again. For the investigators who had carried the weight of the case, for the family who had endured endless nights of waiting, the truth had at last been spoken. But one haunting question still lingered. Why did it take so long to get there? The delay in solving Kelli's case was not just about a lack of evidence, but about the fragile balance between suspicion and proof. From the outside, people wondered why the authorities didn't simply arrest Holbert right away. After all, he was the last person seen with her, and his criminal history was alarming. But in a court of law, suspicion is never enough. Without a body, without clear forensic evidence, any case would likely collapse, leaving him free. That risk was too high. During those 2 years, the investigation quietly unfolded in layers. Detectives returned to the bar, re-interviewing staff and patrons. They traced Kelli's last known movements, reconstructing minute by minute what happened that night. They dug into Holbert's life, where he worked, who he associated with, even how he spent his money. And each time, the picture pointed back to him. He was living in a makeshift campsite in the woods, barely holding his life together, but always managing to avoid saying too much. For Kelli's family, the waiting was unbearable. Her mother described waking up every day with the same thought. Today might be the day we find her, or today might end with nothing at all. The uncertainty became its own kind of torture, a wound that never closed. Friends who had gone out with her that night carried guilt, wondering if there was something they missed, some small sign that could have changed the outcome. Meanwhile, the military community at Fort Bragg was shaken. Soldiers are trained for danger on deployment, not for the threat of vanishing from their own neighborhoods. Kelli's disappearance was a stark reminder that even at home, life can be fragile, unpredictable, and tragically unfair. When the truth finally came to light, the relief was mixed with frustration. Investigators had been right about Holbert all along. They had circled him, questioned him, suspected him. But it took his own words, his confession, to break the silence. Only then did the pieces lock into place, revealing the full story of what happened in those early morning hours after she left Froggy Bottoms. And even then, one can't help but wonder, what was going through Kelli's mind in those final moments? And could anyone have stopped what was about to unfold? To understand what happened that night, investigators pieced together fragments from Holbert's own confession, combined with what they already knew. Kelli had trusted him for one simple reason. He offered her a ride home. In the early hours of the morning, outside a bar where everyone was tired and ready to leave, it didn't seem unusual. She had no way of knowing the danger sitting beside her. Holbert was unstable, living in a tent in the woods, drifting from job to job. He carried with him the weight of a criminal past and the anger of a life unraveling. To him, Kelli wasn't just a passenger. She became an opportunity, a chance to exert control he never had anywhere else. Somewhere between the bar and the apartment complex, the night turned dark. His story of dropping her off cleanly didn't match the evidence. And later, his confession confirmed what investigators long suspected. He had lured her into the woods, away from the lights, away from anyone who could help. Those final moments are impossible to know in full detail. But what is clear is that Kelli never had a chance to escape. She was young, trained as a medic to save lives, not expecting to fight for her own against someone like Holbert. The violence was sudden, and the silence that followed was absolute. He buried her in a shallow grave, just 4 miles from where people were laughing, drinking, and carrying on with their night. The contrast is chilling. Life and death unfolding so close together, unnoticed. For investigators, hearing the confession was both a breakthrough and a burden. Finally, the mystery was solved, but the image of what happened stayed with them. Forensic teams carefully uncovered the site, documenting every detail, treating Kelli's remains with the dignity denied to her in those final hours. What they found confirmed the cruelty of the act, but also gave the family the chance to lay her to rest properly. And even with the confession, the lingering question remains: why Kelli? Why that night? And why did it take years for the truth to surface? The impact of Kelli's disappearance and the eventual discovery of her fate spread far beyond her family. In Fayetteville, the case became a chilling reminder that danger can hide in plain sight. People who had once felt safe going out to the local bars began to look over their shoulders. Soldiers stationed at Fort Bragg, men and women trained for combat zones overseas, now felt unease in their own neighborhoods. If someone like Kelli, disciplined, strong, and respected, could vanish so suddenly, what did that mean for everyone else? Investigators often speak about ripple effects in cases like this. One life lost is never just one tragedy. Friends are left with guilt, wondering if they could have done more. Strangers who never met her carry fear, changing the way they move through their city. Parents tell their daughters to be cautious, not to trust strangers, even if they seem harmless. The community becomes more guarded, more suspicious, and a little less free. For the detectives and agents who worked the case, it was also a lesson in patience and persistence. They had known Holbert was the key, but the justice system requires more than instinct. Every time they spoke to him, every time they circled back to review the evidence, they built a record that eventually supported the confession. Their restraint, though frustrating to outsiders, was part of ensuring that when the truth did emerge, it would stick in court and lead to a conviction. For Kelli's family, the trial brought mixed emotions. They finally had answers, but answers didn't bring her back. Watching Holbert sentenced to life in prison was a form of justice, yet the absence remained. Her mother described it as closing a door, but closing it on a room filled with heartbreak. Stories like Kelli's leave communities asking themselves hard questions. Could this have been prevented? Could more attention to Holbert's past have stopped him sooner? The answers are never simple, and the pain of not knowing lingers. But what remains certain is that her story changed the way people thought about safety, trust, and the fragility of life. The 2 years between Kelli's disappearance and the discovery of her body were filled with endless searching. Law enforcement combed through wooded areas, rivers, and abandoned lots. Volunteers, many of them strangers who had only seen her picture on the news, joined in with flashlights and flyers, determined to bring her home. Each search carried hope, but with every day that passed, that hope became thinner, more fragile. The Army's Criminal Investigation Division worked hand in hand with local police, piecing together timelines and double-checking alibis. They brought in cadaver dogs, ran forensic tests on soil and fibers, and sifted through digital footprints. Text messages, phone records, and surveillance tapes were all examined, each one a possible key to unlock the mystery. But for so long, nothing tied it all together. Every trail went cold. For Kelli's family, these searches were both a lifeline and a torment. They attended vigils, spoke at press conferences, and kept her face in the public eye. Her mother often said she couldn't give up, because if she stopped talking about Kelli, people might forget. And forgetting was the one thing she couldn't allow. Each interview, each plea for information, was a way of keeping her daughter alive in the hearts of strangers. The weight of those years fell heavily on the community too. Fayetteville residents would see missing posters on telephone poles, drive past makeshift memorials with candles and flowers, and feel the silent pressure of a story without an ending. Parents held their children closer. Women changed their routines, cautious of who they spoke to or where they went at night. Life moved forward, but under a shadow. And for investigators, the frustration was sharp. They were certain Holbert knew more than he admitted, but without hard proof, they were stuck, waiting. Each interview with him was a delicate balance. Push too hard, and he might shut down forever. Move too gently, and they risked losing the chance to crack his story. That limbo, stretched across 2 long years, tested everyone involved. And when the truth finally surfaced, it was as if time itself had been holding its breath. When investigators finally broke through to Nicholas Holbert, it wasn't with a dramatic interrogation scene like in the movies. It was a slow, deliberate process built on patience and strategy. Detectives had spent years circling him, letting him know they hadn't forgotten, showing him they weren't going away. That steady pressure weighed on him, and eventually, cracks began to form. Holbert was already unstable, living in the woods, carrying the stress of his past crimes and the suspicion surrounding him. Every time he looked over his shoulder, he saw the investigation. Every conversation with police reminded him that he was never truly free from what he had done. By 2014, the weight of that constant pressure, combined with careful questioning, brought him to the point of breaking. The confession itself was chilling in its simplicity. Holbert admitted that after leaving the bar with Kelli, he drove her not to safety, but to a wooded area away from the main roads. He claimed that an argument sparked, though investigators believe his intent was darker from the start. In the shadows of the trees, he ended her life. With the cold efficiency of someone who had done this in his mind long before, he buried her in the shallow grave, covering the site with dirt and brush. For detectives who had lived with the case for so long, hearing those words was both relief and heartbreak. Relief because the mystery was finally over. Heartbreak because it confirmed the very outcome they had feared from the beginning. Still, Holbert's confession gave them what they needed, the exact location of her remains. Guided by his directions, search teams entered the forest, 4 miles from the bar where she was last seen. The air was heavy, every step measured, until they reached the spot. There, beneath layers of soil and time, they uncovered the truth. The site was processed carefully, not only for evidence, but also for respect. For the first time in over 2 years, Kelli's family would have the chance to lay her to rest. The confession closed the investigative chapter, but it opened new questions. Why did he finally admit it? And what pushed him to reveal the secret he had kept for so long? Once Holbert confessed, the case moved quickly toward the courtroom. Prosecutors no longer had to build a case around circumstantial evidence alone. They now had his own words, backed by the discovery of Kelli's remains. For the family, hearing that confession publicly was both devastating and strangely relieving. They had spent more than 2 years waiting for answers, trapped in a cycle of hope and despair. Now, at least, there was no more uncertainty. The trial was not about whether Holbert had killed Kelli. He had already admitted to it. The focus was on ensuring that justice was carried out fully, without loopholes or appeals that could undo the outcome. In the courtroom, Kelli's family listened as the details were laid out. Her last night alive, the full story Holbert told, and finally, the discovery of her body. Each word was a reminder of what they had lost. Holbert was sentenced to life in prison, without the possibility of parole. The judge's decision ensured that he would never again walk free, never again have the chance to harm someone else. For many, it was a moment of closure. Yet, closure is a complicated word. It doesn't erase grief. It doesn't heal the space left behind by a daughter, a sister, a friend. What it did provide was certainty. The nightmare of not knowing was finally over. At Kelli's funeral, her family and fellow soldiers gathered to honor her life. She was remembered not just as a victim, but as a medic, a woman who dedicated herself to helping others. The military community came together in solemn respect, paying tribute to one of their own, whose life had been cut short. For investigators, the conclusion was bittersweet. They had solved the case, but only after years of pain for the family. Some described feeling relief, while others admitted to lingering frustration. It shouldn't have taken this long, but at least justice had been secured. The story of Kelli Bordeaux reached beyond one courtroom. It became a lesson about persistence, about the dangers hidden in everyday life, and about the strength of a community refusing to give up. Yet even with justice served, one question haunted those who followed the case. What drove Holbert to finally confess after all that time? Why did Nicholas Holbert finally confess after more than 2 years of silence? Experts who study criminal psychology often point out that confessions come from a mix of pressure, guilt, and the fear of being trapped by mounting evidence. For Holbert, life on the run wasn't glamorous. It was exhausting. Living in the woods, avoiding questions, constantly feeling the eyes of investigators on him. Those years became a prison of his own making. Detectives never let him forget he was the prime suspect. Each time they circled back, each time they asked another round of questions, they reminded him the case wasn't going away. That steady drumbeat of attention wears on a person. Even someone capable of violence can feel the weight of isolation, the cracks that form when a secret becomes too heavy to carry alone. Some believe guilt also played a role. Though guilt in criminals like Holbert is rarely straightforward, it may not have been compassion for Kelli or remorse for what he did, but rather guilt for the life he had chosen, guilt for the constant stress of deception. In the end, he may have confessed simply because the burden of hiding was worse than the punishment that waited for him. Investigators also know that confessions are sometimes a way to regain control. By finally speaking, Holbert could shape the narrative, choosing how the story was told. Even in admitting his crime, he tried to explain it on his terms, an argument, a loss of control, rather than premeditation. But regardless of the details he offered, the outcome was the same. He placed himself at the center of the crime and gave authorities what they needed. For the family, it didn't matter what pushed him to speak. What mattered was that the silence had ended. They finally knew where their daughter was, and they could stop living in the endless limbo of unanswered questions. Holbert's confession closed the door on speculation, but it also opened a wider conversation about how communities protect the vulnerable, how the justice system balances suspicion with proof, and how fragile trust can be when darkness hides in plain sight. Kelli Bordeaux's story does not end with the arrest of Nicholas Holbert. It lingers in the lives she touched, in the lessons her case left behind, and in the haunting reminder that sometimes justice comes too late to save a life. She was more than a victim. She was a daughter, a sister, a soldier, a medic dedicated to helping others. Her absence left a hole in her family's world that can never truly be filled. Yet, her memory continues in the strength of those who refused to give up searching for her. The tragedy also reshaped a community. Fayetteville learned that safety could not be taken for granted, that vigilance mattered even in familiar places. The Army community, already carrying the burdens of war abroad, carried another at home. The reminder that danger doesn't always wait on distant battlefields. It can appear in the quiet streets just outside the base. For investigators, the case underscored the importance of patience and persistence. It showed how justice often comes not in dramatic breakthroughs, but in the slow accumulation of pressure, questions, and determination that finally forces the truth to the surface. For all of us listening, Kelli's story becomes more than just a crime to analyze. It is a call to remember the humanity behind the headlines, to think about the lives interrupted, and to ask ourselves what can be done to protect others from similar fates. Her case asks us to stay alert, to speak up when something feels wrong, and to honor the people we lose by refusing to let their stories fade into silence. Kelli Bordeaux should be remembered not only for how her life ended, but for who she was and the resilience of those who loved her. Her story remains a sobering reminder of the fragility of life and the strength it takes to seek truth, no matter how long it takes to find. So now, I leave the question with you. What do you take away from Kelli's story? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe for more true stories where memory, justice, and humanity come together.